Okay, so I'm gonna record to the cloud now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly ELIT meetup here hosted by the HaCCS Lab here, the Humanities and Critical Code Studies Lab. We meet once a month. We're an informal reading group. Often we just have little intimate meetings of folks who are connected with USC somehow to explore electronic literature and sometimes some code related matters. And then we also have sponsored these public events like the one we're having today, where we have guest speakers come around, and then we get people from all around the world participating, which is really fun. At the top, we like to share some events that are coming up and some news and announcements. So I'll share a few things. And the first, and maybe I'll share my screen too for a moment, because I've got some visuals to go with these. Give me a second, a little bit of Zoom fun. Let's see, here we go. Okay, can everybody see that? Hopefully. So one thing that is out in the world is the call for the 2022 Electronic Literature Organization Conference. The Electronic Literature Organization, one of the premier international gatherings of artists. I mean, maybe it is the premier. What the heck? I'm going to call it the premier one. Of artists and scholars working in the area of digital literature. And this year, COVID permitting, we have a conference coming up in Italy, in Como, Italy. So there's a call for submissions. The deadline is January 7th, as you can see there. And I will put a link to this call in the chat for you all, so you have it. And please do consider submitting either a panel proposal or perhaps a work of digital literature or a paper presentation, lightning talk, whatever you want to submit. And again, this will be hopefully in person in Como, Italy, and also online. And that's our first of the announcements today. Second announcement of today. There's a NetProv going on right now. Rob Wittig and I put together these NetProvs. They're online improvisational writing experiences from the Meanwhile NetProv studios. And this one is called Dwindle. And Dwindle takes place on Ben Grosser's finite social media platform called Minus. And that is a platform that only gives you 100 posts ever, although you can reply as much as you'd like and also revise your posts. But this is a little community. And so we've invited people in to imagine what it would be like if they only ever had a limited number of posts. And we've invited them to play characters, a little bit of role playing, to play characters that who desperately have something they want to communicate. But of course, like all of us, have difficulty sharing it. So we're playing that through this month. And then even if you don't, I invite you to check out Ben Grosser's platform, the wonderful net artist, Ben Grosser's platform, Minus. It's more than just a satirical platform to take on the big social media companies. It's really a community of its own that has a much slower and gentler pace than a lot of what you might see. And again, for me, it's sort of this beautiful reflection on sort of digital mortality. But again, it has a community that just like any other platform might have. So I do invite you to check that out. And our third announcement, let me see. Oh, here we go. The call is out for the 2022 Critical Code Studies Working Group. And I will put the link to that in the chat as well, although I see I'm already one link behind. So this is a biennial discussion of code and artwork that plays with code, like the ones we're looking at today, critical making and critical reading of code. It's going to run from January 15th to February 14th. And there's a little application deadline for December 15th. That application, rather than being a hurdle, is really meant just to invite people to think in advance a little bit about some code they might share in the forum that we could discuss. The topics for this year are code in the fiber arts, anti-racist code critiques, code and post-colonialism, code accessibility, inclusivity and community, and creative coding. And then we've got some wonderful thread leaders already lined up. We've got Ann Sullivan and Anastasia Salter, who'll be leading up the code and fiber arts discussion. Nick Montfort, Winnie Soon, Jeff Cox are going to be talking about code accessibility. And of course, their books that have come out recently, exploratory programming and aesthetic programming. And Misha Cardenas is going to be presenting on her forthcoming book, Poetic Operations, which will come out the week after the working group. So we'll get a little preview of that. And then last sort of formal announcement that I'm aware of, our next session that'll happen next month is going to feature Daniel Temkin and Catherine Yang, and they are going to be talking about SO-Langs, esoteric programming languages, including a little preview of one that Catherine, who's one of our community members here in the monthly meetup, a USC undergraduate who's developed her own esoteric language. So those are all the announcements that I'm aware of. Core members, anything else I'm forgetting, Zach or Justin, anything I'm leaving out that you can think of announcement wise? Okay. All right, well, let's continue on then. So, wait, there's a new IF Zine mag. Does that count? Sure, Justin, do you want to say something about that or put it in the chat either way? Okay, well, I'll take it as just a share. So as you can see in the chat, there's a new interactive fiction zine mag, and I assume it's looking for creative submissions, and it's called Void Space Zine. So if you write interactive fiction, then that might be a good place to submit. Oh, also, the deadline is upcoming. One more thing I remember. The deadline is upcoming for the new media writing prize that happens every year. And that prize has both a general arts call, but also a student arts call. So if you are, or if you work with any students, any undergraduates who've been working on creative digital literature, then please encourage them to submit. I think that deadline comes up maybe in a couple of days, actually. I'll have to check the calendar, but it's coming up awfully soon. I can confirm that a little later. All right. Well, those are our formal announcements for now. And again, you can put more things in the chat, more opportunities as you think of them. But let us transition then into our presentation. And hold on one second. I just have to pull up my little notes. Okay, here it is. All right. So it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce to you all, if you don't know her already, Lillian-Yvonne Bertram. They are the author of Travesty Generator, a book of computational poetry that received the Poetry Society of America's 2020 Anna Rabinowitz Prize for Interdisciplinary Work. And it was also longlisted for the 2020 National Book Award for Poetry. Their other poetry books include How Narrow My Escapes, Personal Science, A Slice from the Cake Made of Air, and But a Storm is Blowing from Paradise. Their fifth book, Negative Money, is slated for publication in 2023. They are associate professor in the English department at UMass Boston, where they direct the MFA in Creative Writing program. They also direct the Chautauqua Institute Writers Festival. And again, let's give a big virtual round of applause as we welcome Lillian-Yvonne Bertram. So Lillian, one of the things we were hoping was that you could maybe well, say whatever you'd like, but more importantly, if you could read us a little bit at the top, that would be That would be extraordinary.
Sure. I thought I would read just a couple sections from the poem Tubman's Rock in Travesty Generator. This is, I mean, I love all the poems in the book, but I especially love this one. I think like what you need to know really about this particular poem is that the code, you know, does this work of juxtaposing a lot of different texts together, and the sources of the text come from a lot of different places. And so some of them come from Google search phrases, some of it comes from a list of coded language that slaves and Underground Railroad conductors used to refer to escaping enslaved peoples as they were heading from the south to the north, and references to Harriet Tubman as Moses, as she was called. There's references to Money, Mississippi, and Money, Mississippi was where Emmett Till was murdered, a victim of racial violence. And so there's a lot of different kinds of text happening and coming together. The name of the poem is a reference to the story that Harriet Tubman was hit in the head by a piece of steel, or depending on what version you read, or a rock that afterwards that was thrown by an overseer at another enslaved person and hit her instead. And that afterwards, you know, she probably had a concussion and had lasting effects, some of which led her to have visions, in addition to things like dizzy spells and things like that. So it's a reference to that rock, and also this idea of a landing place, right? As Harriet is a kind of landing place. So I'll just read a few sections from that.
Can we have a page number, Lillian-Yvonne?
Oh, yes, 41. Oh, Marty's following along. It starts on page 41. 0. They tied up Till, steal away. Likely to kill, just stay dead. Drove toward Money, Mississippi, behind enemy lines. The dead trees will show you the way. See us free. Like Jesus, we just won't stay dead. Around your house. To Moses, slowly. When the river ends, steal away. I just wanted the world to see. The riverbank makes for a good road. That Jesus is a friend with friends. 2. I just wanted the world to see, to holler down the lions in this air. Tracks laid from south to the north, they tied up Till, steal away. Around your house to Moses slowly, set us free, and just like Jesus, we won't stay dead. When the wind blows, the first quail calls. Drove toward Money, Mississippi. Behind enemy lines, the riverbank makes for a good road. Trouble the water, holler down the lions. 5. People also ask, what is Harriet Tubman most famous for? Flying bondsmen on French leave, steal away. They drove Emmett Till toward Money, Mississippi. Behind enemy lines, our Moses never lost a passenger. People also ask, why is Harriet Tubman important to the world? Tracks pressed south to north. She often said, a friend of a friend of a friend sent me. And when the wind blows and the first quail calls, the riverbank makes for a good road. I just wanted the world to see. 9. Treasury Secretary in no rush. People also ask, Why is Harriet Tubman important to the world? People also ask, what is Harriet Tubman most famous for? The dollar hasn't changed. Money, Mississippi, dollar sign, dollar sign, dollar sign. Among our talents, to holler down the lions. People also ask, what was Harriet Tubman's life like? Flying bondsman, on French leave, steal away. I just wanted the world to see, to put Tubman on the $20 bill. 10. They say Jesus is a friend with friends, and in each pound of dollar bills, slave patrol, also called patter rollers, patty rollers, patty rollers, patrollers, 3/4. They say our Moses never lost a passenger. To put Tubman on the $20 bill, just like Jesus, we won't stay dead. Of a pound of cotton, I just wanted the world to see. Drove toward money, Mississippi, dollar sign, dollar sign, dollar sign. What they did to my baby.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Wow. All right, but now I have a question. Even before we get to the next thing we were going to do, I have a question. Because here I am without my copy of the book, so I get the PDF so that I can, so I can at least be properly prepared. And I think, oh, I'm going to go to that page because I saw that Marty opened up her book to the right page. So I'm going to do the same thing. Well, what page that's on? Okay. So I do this little thing. I'm like, oh, well, I'll just go to, search for Tubman, right? What's going on?
What? That's weird.
What is hidden in your book here? There's
The haunted
7
PDF.
I'm not telling.
okay. All right. Anyway, all right. Well, no more of that then. But
No.
again, that was wonderful. So, one of the things that's, of course, this work fascinates me on too many levels. So there's not only, of course, the beautiful poetry. There's not only the socially conscious section of it. And then there's of course, with my own special interest, there's this reimagining of code, open source code. Some of it comes from our dear friend, Nick Monfort, and it's repurposed and reimagined, and it's changed and it's transformed into something entirely other. I don't think anybody could ever pick up Travesty Generator and think that they were accidentally reading Shebang, for example, Nick's book of poetry. So again, I just want to present this a little bit as the context. And again, for those of you who have the book, one of the things that you'll find is you get to see code and you get to see what code produces. So knowing that Lillian-Yvonne was coming, I wanted to do a code reading of one of the works. So I picked the easiest of the works to do. I picked 3 last words. I picked a very, very short one. And then, but I wanted to see what it did. And then while I was seeing what it did, I found that I wanted to talk with it. So if you guys will bear the indulgence, this is, I've taken the code from 3 last words, which is direct reference to Eric Gardner and his last words, I can't breathe. And it's been sort of placed in an adaptation of one of Nick's poems from Poem Generators from Shebang, I Am That I Am, but it's been transformed. And then I've placed this in a Google Collab. So we can see this code running. And again, I hope that was okay, Lillian-Yvonne. I just want to get it up and working for people to be able to see. And what you need to know about Google Colab is that, again, it's kind of like Google Docs for code, and allows us to embed code and then comment on it. It's a little bit like a Jupyter notebook, if you know what that is. But think about a Google Doc, essentially a Google Doc that has running code in it. So we can see what this thing does. Now, I'm totally going to put you on the spot. Lillian-Yvonne, would it be bad if I had you read your code sections of this when we get to them? Or is it too hard to see the screen? Is it too small on the screen?
No, I can see it.
Okay, all right. Let's kind of duet this a little bit, even though, of course, this is entirely unrehearsed. Okay, so you take it away first.
So just read it from 1 to 16, basically?
Yeah, from 1 to 16. Yeah, and then there's a little interlude.
Define permutations elements. If length of elements equals 0, the knife yield elements, the knife they, else the knife they hung. For resultant permutations, elements 1 to the range of the knife they hung him, for I in the range of the length elements, the knife they hung him on, yield result I plus elements 0 to 1 plus result. The knife they hung him on was a legal trinket.
And now we can press play here, and it's going to show us what that code does, or will show us the effect of that code. And again, it just processed the code, so no output just yet. Note how Bertram presents the poem as code work, as concrete poetry that combines the lines of activity, the living lines, with the commentary. Why does the commentary iterate with the code? The comments are processing as themselves by invisible code. And is the code like the trinket? Does the code do the hanging? Or is it the tool that hangs the trinket for all to see? Okay, so now here comes another one of your lines, Lillian-Yvonne. Let me let you get that one.
Print list permutations of I.
So let's run that. So there we get our permutation of I, which is essentially I. I is the only permutation you could have of I, presumably. There is only one permutation of I. The I is indivisible. The I, when permutated, is still I. The I cannot be remixed. The I is a character. The I has one character. The I is immutable, or immutable. Okay, you're up again.
Run the code in this cell away. Print list permutations of can't.
While the I cannot be divided, can't can. Can't can become an array of can't and caten and actin and inact. Coded, encoded, uncoded. Can't can become so many things. Letters separated, rearranged, but can't become can. Can it? Okay, this.
Return this articulation, the exhaustion we can't stop hearing. Print list permutations of breathe, this last voice.
Wreathed, broken, the token of breath, be earthed, there a bed. What are the permutations of breath? When one has been broken, when one is being torn apart. Oh, sorry, I ran that before you could, but you go ahead.
Print list combinations of I can't breathe.
And here the code breaks. An error. An error becomes canonical. An error becomes poetry. An error inscribed into the record. And again, just to interject, so that error message is also incorporated into the publication of the book. As the way the code was meant to be? No, the way the code had to be. But there are other tools. So now here's code that I've inserted into this project. From iter tools, import combinations, print list of combinations I can't breathe. These combinations are missing: a library, something from the library, a necessary tool. And then here's another variation on that code. Permutations. And then the permutations permeate, impermanent, resolve the error. When we hack the code, restore the I in the fantasy of the code. But perhaps it is a violence to restore that which has been broken in the code, to show how the system does not function. The processes are born of error. The false codes will not compile. So then it goes back and restores the error. So that was a little exploration. And again, one of the things that Lillian-Yvonne and I were talking about prior to you guys all joining us was that choice to include the error in the code and not to fix it. And again, for the benefit of those who've joined us since then, Lillian-Yvonne, again, you can tell my initial impulse, whatever, my little get it right, good schoolboy behavior is like, oh no, we can fix this code, don't worry. We can, somewhere out there, there's a solution, we can make this operate. And obviously you had the same solutions at your disposal, but you just chose to leave that error. Do you want to talk at all about that choice to leave the error?
Yeah. And just as soon as you said it, like you wanted to fix the error, my impulse now is like, but you wanted to fix the code. That the code isn't broken, right? Like, so like there isn't, for me, like there isn't something there to fix, right? And that's I think in part because my commitments, right, are not, and maybe this will offend programmers, my commitments are not always necessarily to the code, right? We don't have this, and the code is not always committed to me either, so the commitments there are different. But for me, like there's something, when I encountered this error, for me, there's something very unspeakable about trying to compile what is, for me, like an enormity of loss of Black life that can't be compiled, and that, and in some ways it shouldn't be, right? So I sort of, my relationship to the computer and to the software, and in those moments was very much like, there isn't the ability to process all of what has happened and all of what is going on, right? I mean, with this particular racialized murder and all the ones that followed and keep following and the ones that preceded it, right? Which, like, the book itself obviously kind of goes into, there's no cloud big enough, right? With enough, bits and bytes to comprehend and process what that is, like what it is to be extinguished that way, and all of the sort of reverberations that came out of that. And so there's no, right, the code isn't broken. There's no fixing it, because there is no fix for what caused it, right? Or at least there isn't one that is clear. So I really resist And I encourage you too to resist wanting to fix the code so that it doesn't produce an error, because like that's what happened. So I want to leave that messiness right front and center and available, so that we don't think that it can be just compiled and we can be like, okay, good, it's been fixed, it's done, kind of thing.
I feel this temptation to tell the people watching this video in the future that this conversation happens in the context of the deliberations of the verdict on the Kyle Rittenhouse murders, the deliberations on the Ahmaud Arbery murder, as if they won't have their own context for understanding your work and your poems. But I'm sad that they probably have their own topical references that make this all too relevant. But it does bring up a question, though, of course, which is, so again, thinking about the origins of some of these code poem generators. We got Nick's book Shebang, and Nick is a formal experimenter who is interested in all sorts of things. His poems don't often deal with matters of race. What Lillian-Yvonne, what inspired you to adapt these poetry generators to the content and the topics of race-based violence and the historical and social issues that you address?
I think when I was writing this book or compiling it, right, part of me was like, it was just a time in history, right, where sort of like there's only one thing I can be writing about, right, whereas sort of like anything else is just it just felt too urgent. And I get that sometimes it's like it's always urgent, right? But I was just sort of in my creative writing life thinking about like, well, what are you really writing about? Like, what are you going to concentrate and focus on? And I was getting into computational poetics. I was very new in it, and I was thinking, like, if I'm going to use these tools to compose writing, it has to be thinking through the realities of Black life and Black existence. It has to be. It can't just be like tools for tool's sake, or coding for coding's sake. Like, it has to be directed in some way. And the only thing that in my mind is like, the only thing that's important right now is to direct it in this direction with these commitments. Because otherwise, I was in my mind, I was like, otherwise I'm just playing around, right. And I can do that all day long. But I was just like, it has to be, and also too, is a way of just sort of like focusing what I was using this stuff for. Like, what am I, which is different in some ways from other ways that I've written books where maybe I wasn't like, what am I using words for? What am I, what are my words going to be focused around, aside from like me just thinking with myself? So it was a way to give it direction, but also for me, just sort of like, if I'm going to use this, it has to be about this thing. It has to do this. Otherwise, yeah, I'm playing around. And yeah. Not that there isn't room and time and space for that. And I certainly do that all the time. But when I was conceiving of this, it was just like and I think this was maybe like, this was after like something terrible happened.
Right.
Like something terrible happened again to Black people.
Right.
And of course there's a whole chorus of like, we can't believe this is happening. And it's, meanwhile, every Black person was like, where you been at, so it just, so for me at the time, it was like, there wasn't anything else I could be focused on.
which again, like makes code things that are encoded and generators that repeat, so poignant in this case. So you don't use the, I mean, you didn't take mixed code and just substitute some new variables in. You changed it, you modified it, you played around with it, you made it your own. How did you change this code to express your poetry or your the things you wanted to make?
Man, I wish I knew. Yeah. That's one of the sort of interesting things about my coding journey, which is that like I started this with no community and like no support, like
Wow.
It was like me and Stack Overflow and
Okay.
and like what's it called, and of a generous person at the local makerspace.
Whoa, all right.
Who like really took like hours out of his life, to sit down where I was like, what's a Python? And like, here's what Python, because I was working with Raspberry Pi, and I was like, what's a library? What's a Python library? Where's the library at? How do you get there? Like, how do you get stuff from it? Like these very basic questions. So I did not have a lot of interaction with anybody, who else was really doing this. And I knew Nick, but not super well. So like, what did I know about version control? Nothing, when I got stuff working, it's like, and I tell my students all the time, like, don't do destructive editing. And, like, because you don't have to destroy what you wrote to get to the next draft. But I destroyed everything. I destroyed every version of everything.
No.
Because I didn't, there's something about programming or coding for me in which like you can get a result very quickly and you can get another result very quickly by changing something. And I feel like before you know it, or before I knew it, I was 20 versions later within 6 minutes. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, if I tinker with this happens. If I tinker with this, that happens. And if I move this around, that happens. But, I wasn't paying attention to what I was actually moving around because, I just sort of was like, getting just generating things, so like, what did I change? All kinds of stuff. And then I changed it back, or I didn't, or everything went through so many iterations and so much text was generated. And then, because I was working in a Jupyter notebook on my local machine, stuff was generated and then it disappeared. And, because
yeah,
there's this very ephemeral part of it, right? So I would like, something would come out and I was like, oh, that's cool, I'll save it or not. And then, let me tweak this or let me tweak that, or, knowing that like the code would only sort of do what it did to whatever the input was. So I would like change the input, and then that changes the code. And so I would do all of these things, and I didn't keep any of those steps. I wasn't in the mindset of like I should keep this, right? Because I didn't almost know enough about, I was doing destructive editing.
but also like there's a part of me that's like, yeah, maybe that's okay on some level, but I think the thing, like, you're being a little apologetic about it, but I understand why, but of course, we're all making Zen gardens anyway. But the thing I want to just highlight about that is I've, in my experience learning how to program, so much of how I've learned to program is take this thing, so this code somebody else has given you, poke at it, change it till you break it, then ask somebody to help you fix it. Like that, the thing you're describing is exactly the way I've learned how so many things, or made so many things. And it also relates to something you and I were also talking about before this session, which is, there's that sense in which the code environment is designed, feels like it's designed to alienate, belittle, shame everyone who can or cannot do it. And yet on the other side of it is, like you said, Stack Overflow. On the other side of it, it's craft, it's cooking, recipe making. And again, not that cooking can't be as shaming, culture too. It can be if it wants to be, but just thinking about these environments as places that can be built around like a capitalist style intimidation culture of programming, and instead like leaving that toxicity for environments that are much more about sharing knowledge and sharing, making together, and sort of failing our way to success and discovery and things like that. Anyway, but I do want to, there's one more question I have before we open it up, which is, okay, so you did this project and you engage with code. I know you've worked with other things. I know you've also interacted with GPT-2 and things like that. But I do have a question, which is, how did your engagement with code influence like your later writing that may or may not have had code in it?
Yes, I mean that's a great question, and it was one I was actually asked very recently. Where this week, were we Thursday? Yeah, I was asked this on Monday. So for those in the future, it's pandemic time, so what is time?
Hopefully they need to be educated on that.
Yeah, and someone asked me like, well, like, do you just like write a sonnet now? Like, do you do that? And I was like, well, I typically don't write sonnets like end stop, right? Like I don't write sonnets. So it's like it's not really a thing that I do, but code has, I guess, like influenced how I think about form and how I think about combinations and how I think about combinatorial writing and how I think about repetition and variance. So the example I gave this person was like, I don't really write sonnets. I was like, but I did in fact write a sonnet in like the past 18 months. But the end words, right? Whatever rhyme scheme you want the sonnet to have, I was like, the end words, it had just one scheme, right? The alternating end words, and those words are if and then. And so I was like, there's, it's like, I was like, if and then for me comes from programming. I was like, so you read this sonnet and you might not think that there's like some kind of programming or coding thing at work, because there's nothing on the surface, I guess, that points to that. But if X then Y, definitely, I mean, that also comes from logic, but like that's an example of the ways in which it's kind of like bleeding in. And it happens in a lot of other kind of work as well, where I start thinking a lot more about the boundaries maybe that a poem can have, and how to do certain kinds of combinations and formal approaches within those boundaries. And so again, like you'd read the poem and maybe you wouldn't think like, oh, there's a program, behind this that like led to this or something, or that something algorithmic is influencing this. But it is, and that's not actually entirely unlike the work I did before I started programming, where if you kind of go back into my work, specifically like A Slice from the Cake Made of Air and But a Storm is Blowing from Paradise, both of those books are like, have work that is attempting to do something algorithmic and mathematical. So, and that's like it's pre-coding Lillian-Yvonne. And then there's like full-blown coding Lillian-Yvonne. And then there's this like subtle coding influenced Lillian-Yvonne work that is sort of like in the pipeline.
Okay. Well, that's the hint for those of you watching this video who are writing your papers on the poetry of Lillian-Yvonne. You just got a little hint about what your next thesis can be. So, okay, let me open it up, because I apologize. I've been very, very selfish during this session and running it like it's just my own little private conversation space. But I do want to open it up to folks who've taken the time to join us today. If any of you want to ask a question, you want to put up a hand, or if you want to post it in the chat, or however we want to have a little conversation with the 10 or so minutes we have remaining, I'd love to hear from you. Mark Sample has a question, so we'll turn it over to him.
Yeah, thanks. I always just love hearing you reading. My copy of the book is in my office and I'm at home, so I couldn't read along. But it made me think, because I know you're also working with stuff on the screen. Like for you, is there any difference between, or what are the differences between thinking about something that's going to appear in print versus something that might be screen-based or, you know, more interactive?
Yeah, I mean, for stuff that's on the screen, like there's obviously more you can do with like the visual aesthetics, right? Although like the generator that I use most frequently, like the Forever Gwen Brooks generator, has an incredibly minimal aesthetic anyway. So in some ways, like I have not, you know, fully exploited what's on the screen. But what I would say is that I guess the things that are sort of mappable or that mirror are that I have very specific ideas for how I want things to look regardless. You know, whether it's on the page and how I'm putting lines together or on the screen, like the generators and screen-based stuff I've made is like I at least feel like it has a very deliberate visual aesthetic, and that aesthetic tends to be kind of sparse. With the exception of some other things which are actually very garish. So I kind of move between something that's very garish and almost obnoxious, and something that's very sparse, which like maybe I do that in my actual, like, you know, analog work as well. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's something I think about, right? Like the visual presentation. I typically gravitate towards clean things, clean design.
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Fantastic. We have another question in the chat from Leo. Leo, do you want to say that one, or do you want me to read it for you?
I can read it or riff on it. So I'd love to hear you discuss the title of the book, which, I mean, I imagine is citing that famous A Travesty Generator for Micros essay by Hugh Kenner and Joseph O'Rourke from the 80s. But I sense that you're also engaging with the operations of like sampling and generating, like with Markov chain generators and travesty generators. And in this case, you're feeding it samples of racially motivated crimes and generating travesties, and I think travesties of justice in a way. But I'd love to hear your, I don't know, this is just my intuition, my read of it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the title and what you're working with.
I mean, your read is pretty correct, right? There's definitely a way in which it's riffing on, you know, the actual program, right? The Travesty Generator, and also travesties of justice, right? But also the ways in which, like, it's almost as if there was a generator that just continually generates travesties of justice as regards racialized violence. And I'm, you know, given the trials that are happening right now, I'm pretty sure we're about to see another iteration of it, right? There's going to be, this machine is going to generate another travesty, because that's what it does. It can't do anything else, right? As long as we use this particular justice system, it is designed to generate this distortion, right? And present, you know, present justice as if it were justice, right? And be like, this is justice, this is the system, this is it working, when it's like that thing is, you know, just obviously not, you know, you know, or it's just like, you know, if someone, you know, I don't know, gave you a square and said, this is a circle, you know, and there's nothing you could do about it, right? You know, like the circle machine always generated squares, and you called that, you know, a circle. So it's definitely riffing on that. And also, I just, you know, there's a lot of aesthetic pleasure for me as well, in that it's, you know, it's kind of abstract, but interesting and evocative. And so I was drawn to the Travesty Generator as a program because I was like, that's evocative. You know, like I imagine like a box humming in a corner, just like spitting out travesties, which really is what the United States is all about. So, so yeah, I think.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, I'm seeing, I was thinking what you feed it, but you're saying it's also the machine, and I totally see it now. And that's awesome. Thank you.
We have a question, and might be our final question in the chat, that comes from Kathy Behrens, who would love to hear you talk about code switching. And one of the things she's thinking about is a poem that is parents' instructions for how to keep safe. And of course, we have code switching in the book. So I wonder if you wanted to talk about that at all.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many ways in which, like, for me too, like coding and programming is, or coding and using like a Jupyter notebook and like programming in things called cells, right, is so metaphorically rich. Because like you do so much, like, you know, as a Black person, you know, in the United States, you do so much like code switching and like almost like flitting in and out of visibility, right? And like how, and you code switch to be visible or legible in certain ways at certain times. And so the poem that, you know, I think that she's referencing, Coming of Age Stories, is very much sort of about like, what are some of the things, what are some of the codes, right, that you need to know in order to try and stay safe in a environment that is fundamentally anti-Black. And there's, I mean, of course, there's also like the NPR podcast Code Switch, which takes us up, right? You know, and these questions of like, you know, you're always switching and navigating between and among different codes that are majority designed to limit your ability to thrive and survive, right? At the same time that there are ways in which you can code switch in an environment that explodes the possibilities for community, right? But if you don't know the code, right, and that gets taken up in Tubman's Rock, where like the codes, right? The riverbank and the quail calling and parcel French leave, you know, all of these things. If you don't know those codes, you know, like you thankfully, right, then like you can't pick up on what's going on. You don't know what, you don't know who's escaping to where and when. So there's a lot of ways in which like code switching for Black Americans is about, you know, interacting with one's own community in such a way that it's like very much about surviving and thriving and being part of something. And also it's a way to sort of protect yourself when you're navigating in a predominantly anti-Black world, right? So there's a lot there. I would say it's a very loaded question, but there's code switching all over the book. And even then, like me switching my language into code, right? It's its own kind of like code switching, right? Like now I'm like playing on this playground as opposed to another, and going back and forth.
I love it. And this also calls to mind, again, the work of Ruha Benjamin and the new Jim Code and what she calls race critical code studies, which tends to think of codes more broadly than, you know, codes as enacted and codes as the things operating upon lives on racialized bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my goodness. Too much, too good. I'm too grateful. Lillian-Yvonne, thank you for joining us for our little session here.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, audience.
It's been just an absolute pleasure. I do want to give people a little like preview, a little whatever that I have asked Lillian-Yvonne if she can join us a little more fully in the Critical Code Studies working group this coming up year, and she's tentatively agreed to yes, but she's not committed to that. I'm just saying that that's a possibility, so we're looking forward to that. Thank you all of you who joined us. thank you so much for coming out for this and being a part of this and for making it a really wonderful experience and conversation. Thanks all of you who asked questions.
Thank
And-
you. Thank you.
And I hope you guys will come back and join us soon. If you want to be on the mailing list, just send me an email, or you can leave a message, leave your email in the chat and I'll grab it out of there. But emailing me is the most reliable way to do that. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm gonna stop the recording now. So goodbye, people in the future.